Moral supremacism and human degradation of socialist and ideological states. All states are in the intersubjective. The socialist state has no physical or subjective existence and would disintegrate if subjected to rules of existence that apply in the other domains. Restricted to a domain where laws of logic need not apply, abstractions within its bounds can be what would be impossible in the physical and subjective realities. Whether socialist, fascist, theocratic, or any shade of utopianism, the state in that strange, chaotic, but sometimes sensible place can sequester the agency and consciousness from any number, leaving people rudderless, dehumanized victims of circumstance. This type of state pulls what it should not, and, were it allowed outside the intersubjective, create a gigantic conscious entity imbued with the sum of pooled consciousness and agency, personal sovereignty, stripped from people. Humans are subject in humanity, while that abstraction comes alive, thinks, reasons, and, thanks to a great lie, seems to act for itself. This echoes the inhumanity of Wittgenstein's investigations, where he ignores shared human physiology of perception and brain function, as he argues, in effect, for language and meaning to be determined solely by usage. Using a simple trope, he subjects humans to inhumanity to substantiate a relativist theory with appalling moral implications that lead to modern cultural relativism and political paralysis that we are cursed with today. Abstractions, chimeras, incarnate emotion, creatures of faith and so many more can think, act, engage, cooperate, fight, live and die in the intersubjective. The closed system of Marxism relies on abstractions such as capitalists, workers, bourgeois and others fighting one another. These creatures, for they only exist created by mutual active or passive agreement between people, can take on characteristics such as consciousness and agency that, strictly, are impossible anywhere else but in the sea of non-logic of the intersubjective. In that place, socialist, fascist, theocratic, or any created unphysical or non-subjective monster can slug it out as if they are gigantic creatures engaged in a murderous brawl to the death. For those aware that rules of existence differ in the physical, subjective and intersubjective domains will know monsters in the intersubjective, conjured by ideology, political theory or other mental devices, have no place in physical reality. Strictly, they can't claim the moral status exclusive to creatures who, being conscious with physical presence, can reason and are motivated by emotion. Because the intersubjective can harbour such horrors, stupidity, irrationality and chaos does not mean that it cannot also include their opposites. Logic exists there, but its scope is restricted. This chaos leaves a chance for contradictory or half-baked ideas to combine to create something consistent, useful and true. Nowhere else, except within human memory, is it possible for two wrongs to make a right, where a combination of stupidity can make sense. Social freedom and freedom of thought rely on this phenomenon. Permission for contradiction is one reason for the sophistication and creativity of the intersubjective. It exists in our heads in meaning, language, connotation and momentum of ideas. It should be remembered that words are not meaning. Translating from one language to another is not straightforward. The process involves reference to a common meaning, although wordless, nonetheless it exists. This simple observation will be beyond many of most modern philosophers, fixated on the closed, self-justifying, earlier and later systems of Wittgenstein. The blood and guts agency of the socialist state, metaphorical cannibalism, are extracted from people to make it into a quasi-human leviathan of the intersubjective. Unaware of the domains of reality where the intersubjective depends on the subjective, depends on physical reality, socialists and ideologues, dazzled by leviathans of the intersubjective, turn the hierarchy of dependence on its head. In heart and faith, they mouth the lie that physical reality depends on the subjective, which in turn depends on the intersubjective. Potentially dangerous irrationality that should be restricted to the intersubjective is allowed, in apostrophes, to dictate to humans supposedly stripped of agency and consciousness. Then, with phenomenal arrogance, via subjectivity, the intersubjective impudently dictates physical reality. Bar war, faith, death and conquest, ideology is the greatest menace to humanity. But ideology, like war, conquest and mental death, rolls them all into one. Utopians create political monsters in the intersubjective out of the authority of individuals and their agency. Metaphorically, too often literally, they feed on the blood and guts of millions. Terry Nation, creator of the Daleks, was inspired by the behaviour of ideologues who triggered the mid-20th century war, aka Nazis. The Davros actor, as a slip, took a cue from Bertrand Russell, a distant relative of mine who catapulted Wittgenstein to the irrational status of unassailable academic authority. A state imbued with authority, consciousness and agency, belonging to all those of whom it claims moral superiority, is a potential excuse for despotism. It's not wrong in itself, because anything goes in the intersubjective, but the slightest chance of despotism must be crushed to ensure wholesale contempt for humanity cannot escape the intersubjective. We must not let the hierarchy of dependence of the three domains of existence go topsy-turvy. The deluded in positions of authority who believe that physical reality depends on subjectivity and that existence derives from the intersubjective must never be allowed to let rip unmoderated chaos of the intersubjective into human lives. It is the job of democracy to moderate the intersubjective, to make as much sense from it, to constantly aim at dynamic utopia, changing as the means of satisfying the demands of humanity, but constantly alter with circumstances. Ideology can't handle change. It's hopeless when it comes to reason, which is ironic because it can be wildly influential and creative, generating monsters in the intersubjective, where logic is not the only game in town. The plodding, materialistic, abstractionist materialism of socialism and Marxism is utterly hopeless once the nature of the intersubjective, the hierarchy of domain interdependence, the paradoxes of reason, and the metamorphosis of meaning are appreciated. Well, as you can see, I'm going back to using a video again. I'm trying to get better. I'm a little bit antiquated now and I have good days and bad days, but today isn't too bad. Thanks for listening. I'll dig more into this idea of the socialist state, or that strange sort of creature which seems to feed and depend upon confiscating the consciousness and agency of individuals. It's sort of self-justifying. And also its attitude that because it is the pool of all the agency and consciousness of people, it can do no wrong. And this assumes that people naturally don't want to do wrong. And yet it's fairly obvious. In humanity, there's about 10% of people who will be good quite regardless of how they're treated. About 80% go with the wind to a greater or lesser extent. I count myself among those. And 10% who will be good regardless of how they're treated. The 10% of the grit on the machine of the other 10% who can but be bad and hopelessly evil. It's not a grim way of looking at things, and once you break out of the ideological belief that somehow there's one humanity, one nature, and see people as they are, many fallible, most of us, a few infallible in as far as that they will be good quite regardless, or quite ghastly and bad regardless, then it does make things a little easier to understand and to write about. Anyway, until next time, and thanks again for listening.